cowboy asked her to wear his wedding ring for one reason, but the look on his face during the hearing suggested there was something he never planned to confess. The courtroom fell silent as Hannah opened a worn leather ledger and set it on the table. Outside, wagon wheels rattled over the dusty street, but inside all she could hear was the faint scrape of paper and the quick beat of her own heart. Across the room, Harper stood rigid beside the window, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on her. Then someone near the back whispered a name that shouldn't have been part of this hearing at all. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and join us for more unforgettable Western love stories. The missing money was discovered just after sunrise. A freight ledger lay open on the office desk of Desert Line Transport, its pages marked with neat columns of figures. Outside, wagons rattled over the dusty street. Teamsters shouted to one another as they loaded crates bound for Tucson. Inside the office, no one was shouting. The silence was worse. Hannah Brooks stood beside the desk while her employer stared at the books. A canvas money pouch sat open between them. Empty. $300 from a cattle shipment had vanished. The amount was large enough to ruin a small business, large enough to make people stop listening and start blaming. Hannah, her employer said quietly, you were the last person to handle the records. She looked at him steadily. I balanced them before closing yesterday. No one answered. A clerk near the window lowered his eyes. Another suddenly became interested in sweeping dust from the floor. The decision had already been made. By noon, Hannah's desk was cleared. By 1 o'clock, she was standing outside with a small suitcase and her final pay envelope. No investigation, no questions, no chance to defend herself. The hot Arizona sun hung over the street while townspeople moved around her as if nothing had happened. Hannah walked to her boarding house. The landlady met her at the door. You still owe for next week? I'll pay it. You have until Saturday. The door closed. Hannah stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the latch click into place. That sound seemed louder than it should have been. 3 days later, she used nearly all the money she had left to buy a seat on a stagecoach, heading toward Red Canyon Basin. The journey took most of the day. Red cliffs rose from the earth like old walls. Dry grass bent beneath the wind. Scattered cattle grazed across distant flats. Near sunset, the coach rolled into Dry Ridge. The town was small. A land office stood near the center street. A blacksmith shop sent sparks to the evening air. Horses waited at hitching rails outside a saloon. As Hannah stepped down from the coach, raised voices drifted across the street. She turned. A broad-shouldered rancher stood outside the land office. Across from him stood a well-dressed man with a silver watch chain, Elias Mercer. Even Hannah recognized the name. Everyone in Arizona Territory seemed to know it. If you fail to meet the conditions, Elias said, loud enough for nearby people to hear, the water contract transfers next season. The rancher didn't move. Harper Creek isn't yours yet. Not yet, Elias replied. Their eyes locked. Then Elias smiled and walked away. The rancher remained standing alone. Dust rolled through the street between them. Later that night, Hannah learned his name, Harper. Unfortunately, learning his name did not solve her own problem. The innkeeper glanced at her, then at the last available room key. It's taken. Hannah looked past him. The hook behind the counter still held the key. Neither of them mentioned it. She thanked him anyway and stepped back outside. The temperature had dropped sharply. Wind swept through the town. Near the livery stable, she found shelter beneath an overhanging roof and placed her suitcase beside her boots. For a long time, she sat there listening to horses shift in their stalls. The town lights dimmed one by one. Then footsteps approached. A man stopped a few feet away. Harper. He looked at her suitcase, then at the dark street, then at her. Neither spoke immediately. The wind moved between them. Finally, Cole said, "You don't have anywhere to stay." It wasn't a question. No. He nodded once. His gaze drifted toward the land office at the far end of town. When he spoke again, his voice remained calm. "I need a wife." Hannah blinked. The words sounded strange enough that she wondered if she had heard them correctly. Cole slipped a simple band from his coat pocket. Not gold, not fancy, just plain silver. "Pretend to be my wife for a few months," he said. The wind rattled the stable doors. Hannah stared at the ring resting in his palm. Then she looked up at the man offering it. For the first time all day, she felt something besides exhaustion. Not trust, not safety, only the faint sense that her road had just turned somewhere she never expected. Cole held out the ring. "There will be rules." The wind moved through the stable yard, carrying dust and the smell of hay. Hannah looked down at the plain silver band. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't romance. It looked more like an agreement between two people who had run out of better options. "What kind of rules?" she asked. Cole slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "You'll have your own room." He spoke plainly. "No one tells you where to go. No one tells you what to do." Hannah waited. "When the water hearing is over, you're free to leave." The stable lantern flickered beside them. Cole looked toward the dark outline of the hills beyond town. "That's all." For a moment, neither moved. Then Hannah took the ring. Not because she trusted him, because she trusted the cold night even less. The ride to Harper Creek Ranch began before sunrise. The sky carried the pale gray color that comes just before dawn in the desert. Their wagon followed a narrow road winding through red stone bluffs and dry washes. Cole drove. Hannah sat beside him. Most of the trip passed in silence. Not uncomfortable, not friendly. Simply the silence of strangers traveling toward the same destination. By mid-morning, the ranch appeared. A weathered wooden gate stood between two stone posts. Beyond it stretched corrals, grazing cattle, and a low ranch house built to withstand years of dust storms. Nothing about it looked wealthy. Everything about it looked cared for. A gray-haired cowboy emerged from the barn. He removed his hat. "Morning, Cole." Then his eyes settled briefly on Hannah. Not curious, just surprised. "This is Ben Carter," Cole said. Ben nodded politely. "Ma'am." No questions followed. Hannah appreciated that. Inside the house, Cole showed her the room at the end of the hallway. A narrow bed, a washstand, a wooden chair, a window overlooking the pasture. The room was clean. That mattered. "This one's yours," Cole said. He stepped back toward the door. "My room's across the house." Then he left. No lingering. No explanation. No attempt to make things easier than they were. By afternoon, Hannah was helping Ben organize old ranch records stored in a shed beside the barn. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. Boxes filled with invoices, cattle receipts, tax records, and land surveys sat stacked against the wall. "Most of this hasn't been touched in years," Ben admitted. Hannah smiled faintly. "Then we'd better start." Hour after hour, she sorted papers, separated dates, matched receipts, rebuilt missing ledgers. It felt good to work again. Near sunset, she stopped. A folded document lay hidden between two water contracts. She opened it, then frowned. The numbers didn't match. Another document showed similar discrepancies. Then another. Water allocations. Property boundaries. Transfer records. Someone had altered figures. Not carelessly. Deliberately. Hannah placed the papers aside. Her eyes narrowed. Outside, hoofbeats crossed the yard. Cole was returning from checking fences. She watched through the window as he dismounted and headed toward the barn. Tired, dust-covered, alone. The next few days settled into a routine. Hannah rose before sunrise, built a small fire in the kitchen stove, boiled coffee, sorted records. Ben repaired fences. Cole worked cattle and met with neighboring ranchers. Word spread quickly through Dry Ridge. Too quickly. When Hannah accompanied Cole into town for supplies, conversations slowed as they entered the general store. A rancher near the counter tipped his hat to Cole, then ignored Hannah completely. Another refused her offered handshake. She withdrew her hand without comment. Cole noticed. He said nothing. But he remained beside her until they left, not shielding her, not abandoning her, simply staying where he stood. That evening, the sun disappeared behind the red canyon walls. Hannah remained at the kitchen table long after supper. Ledgers surrounded her. An oil lamp burned low. She carefully copied figures from damaged records into a fresh book. Outside, coyotes called somewhere beyond the pasture. Hours passed. When she finally rubbed her eyes and looked up, a tin mug sat beside her elbow. Steam rose from fresh coffee. She hadn't heard anyone enter. Across the room, Cole was already walking toward the door. He never mentioned the coffee. Never paused. Never looked back. The door closed softly behind him. Hannah wrapped both hands around the warm mug. For a long moment, she simply sat there listening to the quiet house. Then her eyes drifted toward the stack of altered water records. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Someone was stealing water rights. And judging by the names on those documents, Elias Mercer was somehow connected. Outside the window, another rider crossed the distant road, Luke Dawson. He had stopped his horse near the fence line. His gaze remained fixed on the ranch house, and more specifically, on the papers spread across Hannah's table. A few minutes later, he turned his horse around and rode hard toward town, toward Elias Mercer. The next morning arrived bright and dry. Sunlight spread across the canyon walls and painted the pasture gold. Hannah was already awake. She sat at the kitchen table with a pencil tucked behind one ear and a stack of records spread in front of her. A coffee cup rested beside her hand. The pages she had copied the night before lay neatly arranged. Outside, cattle moved slowly through the pasture. Inside, the house was quiet. Cole entered through the back door carrying a bucket of water from the well. His eyes drifted briefly toward the documents. "You sleep at all?" "A little." He nodded. Nothing more. That was often how conversations ended between them. Yet somehow it no longer felt cold. By the end of the week, the rumors began. At first they traveled quietly. A comment outside the feed store, a glance at the post office, a conversation that stopped when Hannah entered a room. Then they became louder. People claimed she had tricked Cole. Others said she had come to Harper Creek Ranch looking for money. Someone suggested the marriage existed only on paper. No one said these things directly to her face. Not yet. One Saturday afternoon, church bells echoed across Dry Ridge. Families gathered in the small white church near the center of town. The wooden pews filled quickly. Dust drifted through sunlight near the stained glass windows. Hannah sat beside Cole near the middle row. Ben Carter occupied the bench behind them. The service ended quietly. People stood. Conversations resumed. Then Luke Dawson cleared his throat. The sound carried farther than it should have. Several heads turned. Luke rested one hand against a pew and smiled without warmth. "Funny thing about trust," he said. The room gradually fell silent. Hannah felt it happen. One conversation stopping, then another, then another. Luke looked directly at her. "I heard a transport company lost a fair amount of money not too long ago." No one moved. I also heard the woman responsible ended up here. The silence deepened. Every eye in the church seemed to settle on Hannah. For a moment, she simply stood there. Her hands remained folded, her shoulders straight. Luke waited. Perhaps he expected an argument. Perhaps he expected shame. Instead, Hannah answered calmly. Did they ever prove who took it? Luke's smile faded slightly. No. Then perhaps they should have. Several people exchanged glances. Luke opened his mouth again. Before he could speak, Cole stepped forward. Just one step. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. If you've got proof, Cole said, show it. The room stayed quiet. Luke said nothing, because there was nothing to show. After a long moment, he turned away. The conversation slowly returned around them, but the damage lingered. Outside the church, people spoke more carefully than before. Some avoided looking at Hannah altogether. The ride home felt longer than usual. Wind moved through the grasslands. Neither spoke for several miles. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. You didn't have to do that. Cole kept his eyes on the road. Yes, I did. That was all. Yet something about the way he said it stayed with her. Days later, a letter arrived from Tucson. It came folded inside a worn envelope with faded postage marks. Hannah recognized the handwriting immediately. An old bookkeeper from Desert Line Transport. She opened it beneath the porch lantern that evening. By the time she reached the final page, her pulse had quickened. The missing money. The former route manager. A man named Charles Greeley. He had disappeared from Arizona 2 days after the theft. Several irregularities had been discovered afterward. Receipts, missing vouchers, false signatures. Hannah folded the letter slowly. For the first time since losing her job, she saw a path toward the truth. Not proof, not yet, but a path. The following week brought darker clouds. Summer storms gathered over the distant mesas. One afternoon, Ben rode in from the north pasture. We need to move the herd before that weather hits. Cole glanced toward the horizon. The sky had turned the color of iron. Within an hour, riders were saddling horses. Hannah stood beside the corral gate. You know how to ride? Cole asked. A little will have to do. The herd moved out before sunset. Dust rose beneath hundreds of hooves. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the canyon walls. The route through the narrow pass left little room for mistakes. Rain arrived fast. Sharp drops struck hats and saddle leather. A frightened steer broke from the herd and charged toward open ground. Cole wheeled his horse after it. Hannah saw the gap opening immediately. Without thinking, she moved her horse into position. Not recklessly, not trying to be a hero. Just enough. Enough to turn the animal back toward the herd. Enough to keep the line from breaking apart. By nightfall, the cattle reached shelter. The storm finally released its grip. Then a horse stumbled. Cole hit the ground hard. The ranch hands rushed forward. He stood quickly, too quickly. A few steps later, he nearly lost his balance. Back at the ranch, everyone eventually drifted away. Everyone except Hannah. She sat beside the kitchen table with bandages, warm water, and a lantern. Cole remained stubbornly silent while she cleaned a cut near his shoulder. You always this difficult? She asked. Only when I'm hurt. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Not quite. For a brief moment, something lighter settled between them. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, neither seemed eager for the evening to end. Much later, after Cole had gone to bed, Ben Carter lingered near the doorway. He watched Hannah fold the cloths. Then he spoke quietly. You know why he's got those rules? Hannah looked up. Ben stared toward the dark hallway. The woman he was supposed to marry died 3 days before the wedding. The room became very still. Ben lowered his voice. He never really came back from that. The lantern flame flickered once, and Hannah suddenly understood that some wounds did not leave scars where people could see them. For a long time after Ben Carter went to bed, she remained at the kitchen table. The rain had stopped. Only the sound of water dripping from the porch roof remained. Across the hallway, behind a closed door, Cole slept. Or at least she assumed he did. She folded the clean bandages, stacked them neatly, and finally carried the lantern to her room. But Ben's words followed her. 3 days before the wedding. 3 days. Close enough to touch a future. Close enough to lose it. The next morning arrived clear and bright. Nothing about the ranch seemed different. The cattle still needed water. Fence posts still leaned where they had leaned yesterday. Coffee still steamed from the stove before sunrise. Yet something had shifted. Not in the ranch. In the way Hannah looked at Cole. She noticed things now. The pause before he answered certain questions. The way he avoided discussing the future. The habit of keeping old memories locked behind careful silence. Work continued. The water rights hearing was less than 2 weeks away. Most evenings, Hannah remained buried in records. The altered documents she had discovered earlier now formed a growing pile. Land surveys, water contracts, property maps. Some of the dates had been changed. Several signatures looked suspicious. One ranch had lost access to a creek despite records showing otherwise. Another family's grazing rights had quietly disappeared. Again and again, the trail seemed to lead back toward Elias Mercer. One afternoon, Hannah spread dozens of documents across the dining table. Ben sat nearby polishing a saddle buckle. Cole entered carrying feed receipts from town. She looked up. I found enough to prove someone changed the records. Cole set the papers down. Enough to prove Elias? Almost. Almost. The word lingered. Almost wasn't certainty. Almost wasn't enough for a hearing. Still, it was the closest they had come. Over the next several days, Hannah worked harder than ever. She copied figures by lamplight, compared signatures, matched dates, built a careful case piece by piece. Then one evening, everything disappeared. The storage room behind the barn stood open. The lock hung broken. Boxes had been overturned. Shelves emptied. Documents gone. The cold evening wind drifted through the doorway. Hannah stared at the empty shelves. For several seconds, she couldn't move. Cole arrived moments later. One look told him everything. Ben followed. No one spoke immediately. There wasn't much to say. Weeks of work had vanished. At supper that night, the kitchen felt strangely hollow. The food sat untouched. Finally, Cole broke the silence. We stop. Hannah looked up. What? We stop. His voice remained calm. The hearing's almost here. We still have time. No. She set her fork down. We're this close. We don't have proof anymore. We can rebuild it. Cole shook his head. The movement was small, firm. No. The room became quiet. For the first time since arriving at Harper Creek Ranch, Hannah felt anger rise. Not loud anger. The kind that sits deep and steady. You want to quit. Cole looked away. She saw something pass through his face. Not surrender. Fear. The same fear Ben had described. The fear of losing something important. The conversation ended there. Neither spoke much the rest of the evening. The distance between them returned, perhaps wider than before. The following afternoon, Hannah entered the hallway searching for spare account books. At the far end stood a door she had never seen open. The brass knob showed little wear. Dust rested along the frame. Curious, she tried it. Locked. Hours later, while putting away supplies, She noticed a key hanging inside Cole's workroom. The shape matched. She hesitated, then looked away. The next morning, she passed the door again. The house was empty. Cole and Ben had ridden north to repair fencing. The key remained where it had been. By evening, curiosity won. The lock turned easily. The room beyond was silent. A bed stood neatly made. A framed photograph rested on a dresser. A wedding veil lay folded inside a wooden box. Letters tied with ribbon. A pressed flower between book pages. Nothing disturbed. Nothing discarded. Everything preserved. As though time had stopped inside that room. Hannah stood there only a moment, long enough to understand, long enough to realize why Cole never spoke about the woman he had lost. When she closed the door, she did so carefully, respectfully. That night neither mentioned it, but she looked at him differently, and somehow he seemed to know. The next evening, wind swept across the basin harder than usual. The horses grew restless. Darkness settled quickly. Near midnight, a shout shattered the quiet. Ben's voice. Then another. Hannah sat upright. Smoke. She smelled smoke. By the time she reached the porch, flames were climbing the side of the horse barn. Men ran across the yard carrying buckets. Horses screamed inside. The sound cut through the night. Without thinking, Hannah ran. A stall door had jammed. Two frightened horses kicked against the wood. She grabbed the latch. Heat pressed against her face. The animals needed room, needed a path, needed someone. The door finally gave way. The horses burst free. Then part of the roof collapsed behind her. A voice shouted her name. Cole! She turned. Smoke rolled between them. For one terrible second, she couldn't find the way out. Then Cole appeared. He reached her, took hold of her arm, pulled her through the haze and into the open night air. They stumbled onto the dirt together. The fire crackled behind them. Neither spoke at first, both breathing hard. The ranch hands continued fighting the blaze. Ben shouted orders somewhere nearby, but Hannah heard none of it, because Cole was looking directly at her, not past her, not through her. At her. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he said quietly, "My only rule was never letting someone get close enough to lose." The words barely carried above the wind. His jaw tightened. I already lost one woman. Hannah felt her heartbeat slow. Around them, sparks drifted upward into the dark sky. Cole swallowed hard. Then spoke the truth he had been avoiding for months. I broke that rule. Silence settled between them. Not empty silence. The kind that changes things. The fire still burned. The hearing still waited. The evidence was still gone. And somewhere beyond the darkness, Elias Mercer probably believed he had already won. As dawn approached, smoke drifted across the ranch yard. The barn stood blackened. The records were gone. Every last piece. Hannah stared toward the rising sun. The hearing was tomorrow, and now they had nothing left to prove their case. The sun rose through a haze of smoke that still lingered over Harper Creek Ranch. The remains of the barn stood dark against the morning sky. A few ranch hands moved quietly through the yard, gathering tools and checking the surviving horses. No one spoke much. There wasn't much to say. The hearing would begin at 10 o'clock in Dry Ridge. Without evidence, Elias Mercer would win. Hannah sat alone at the kitchen table. A cup of coffee had gone cold beside her hand. The silver ring Cole had given her months ago rested near the edge of the table. She turned it slowly between her fingers. Across the room, Cole pulled on his coat. He looked exhausted. Not from the fire. From carrying disappointment. We don't have to go, he said. Hannah looked up. Yes, we do. Cole studied her face. For a moment it seemed he might argue. Instead, He nodded. An hour later, they rode into town. The road wound between red cliffs and dry creek beds. Dust followed the wagon wheels. Neither spoke much. The silence no longer felt uncertain, only heavy. As they approached the land office, people were already gathering. Ranchers, merchants, farm families, men leaning against hitching rails, women standing beneath awnings to escape the sun. News traveled fast in small towns, especially when land and water were involved. Elias Mercer stood near the entrance wearing a dark vest and polished boots. He looked relaxed, confident, the kind of man who believed the outcome was already decided. Luke Dawson stood nearby. A faint smile crossed his face when he spotted Hannah and Cole. Inside, the hearing room slowly filled. Deputy Owen Tate sat near the rear wall. Ben Carter occupied a chair beside the aisle. At exactly 10 o'clock, the clerk called the room to order. Papers shuffled. Chairs creaked. Then Elias rose. He presented contracts, maps, witness statements, everything arranged neatly. When he finished, he sat down looking entirely satisfied. The clerk turned toward Cole. "Do you wish to respond?" For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Cole stood, then hesitated, because there was nothing left to present. No records, no copied maps, no contracts. The fire had taken everything, or so everyone believed. Hannah rose from her chair. A ripple moved through the room. Cole looked at her, surprised. She stepped forward carrying a worn leather ledger, the same ledger she had carried onto the ranch months earlier. No one had paid attention to it then. Now every eye followed it. She placed it carefully on the table. Elias frowned. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared on his face. Hannah opened the book. Page after page revealed handwritten copies, dates, transactions, water allocations, land transfers. Every document she had copied by hand over months of work. Not because she expected trouble, because she trusted records more than memory. A murmur spread through the room. Elias's confidence began to fade. Hannah spoke clearly. "I kept duplicates." The clerk accepted the ledger. Deputy Owen Tate stepped forward. He examined several pages, then another, then another. His expression hardened. "I've seen these figures before." The room grew quiet. Owen looked toward Elias. Several of these transactions should never have been approved. Luke shifted in his seat. Ben Carter slowly stood. His old boots echoed against the wooden floor. "I was there when some of those boundaries were marked." Every head turned. Ben pointed to one of the maps. Those lines were changed later. The silence that followed felt enormous. Luke suddenly looked far less comfortable. Questions came quickly after that. More records were examined, dates compared, signatures reviewed. Piece by piece, the truth surfaced. Not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily, like water rising. By noon, the room understood what had happened. Elias Mercer had manipulated water agreements for years. Luke Dawson had helped him. The clerk announced the ruling shortly afterward. Harper Creek Ranch would retain its water rights. Several transactions would be investigated further. Deputy Owen Tate stepped toward Luke. No raised voices, no struggle. Only a quiet instruction. Luke lowered his head. Elias remained seated. For the first time since Hannah had met him, he looked old. Very old. Outside, sunlight filled the street. People gathered in small groups discussing what they had witnessed. Cole and Hannah walked back toward the wagon. Neither spoke immediately. The fight was over. The ranch was safe, the danger had passed. And somehow that felt harder than expected, because now the agreement between them had reached its end. That evening, Harper Creek Ranch sat quiet beneath a red sunset. Hannah packed her suitcase, the same suitcase she had carried into Dry Ridge months ago. A few dresses, a Bible, receipts, letters, nothing more. When she finished, she carried the silver ring into the kitchen. Cole stood by the window. She placed it gently on the table. The sound was small, but impossible to ignore. Neither looked away. No tears, no argument, no attempt to make the moment easier. "The hearing's over," Hannah said softly. Cole nodded. The agreement had ended, just as promised. The next morning, she boarded the stagecoach waiting near the station. The driver checked baggage. Passengers settled into their seats. Horses shifted impatiently. Hannah climbed aboard. Then hoofbeats thundered down the street. Heads turned. Dust rose. Cole Harper rode hard through town. He pulled his horse to a stop beside the coach, breathing hard, hat missing, shirt still half-buttoned. The entire street seemed to freeze. Cole looked up at Hannah. For a second, neither moved. Then he spoke, not loudly, but everyone heard him. "I asked you to pretend because I was afraid." The wind carried the words across the platform. He swallowed, then continued. "I'm asking for real because I don't want another morning without you." Silence settled over the crowd. No one had ever seen Cole Harper ask for anything, especially not this. Hannah looked toward the road ahead, the one she had once believed she would travel alone. Then she looked back at him, at the man who had opened his home, stood beside her, trusted her, and finally learned how to let someone stay. Slowly, she stepped down from the coach. The suitcase remained where it was. She crossed the distance between them. Cole held the ring in his hand, the same plain silver ring. This time Hannah closed his fingers around it, then smiled. Small, real, and enough. 1 year later, spring returned to Red Canyon Basin. Grass covered the hillsides. Calves wandered through the pasture. The rebuilt barn stood stronger than before. Inside the ranch house, account books filled an entire shelf, every page organized in Hannah's careful handwriting. Outside, Cole repaired a fence near the creek. He looked up when the front door opened. Hannah stepped onto the porch carrying 2 cups of coffee. The morning sun painted the valley gold. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood together, watching cattle move through the pasture below. No contracts, no pretending, no rules. Only 2 people who had once met because both had nowhere else to go, and who stayed because they finally found a place worth calling home. The wind crossed the valley. The gate creaked softly. Somewhere beyond the hills, a hawk circled through the bright Arizona sky. And for the first time in many years, neither of them was waiting for something to be taken away. They had already chosen. And this time, they chose each other. As the sun settled over Red Canyon Basin and the shadows stretched across the pasture, it became clear that Hannah and Cole were never saved by luck. They were changed by small decisions made over and over again. A hand offered when pride said to walk away. A door left open. A promise kept. A person who stayed. And maybe that's what makes this story feel so real. Because if you place yourself in Hannah's boots, standing alone in a strange town with nowhere left to go, you realize how easy it would have been to stop trusting people. And if you stand where Cole once stood, carrying an old loss for years, you understand how tempting it can be to build walls so strong so that nothing can hurt you again. But walls keep pain out and life out at the same time. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes quietly. It sits across the table. It leaves a cup of coffee beside your hand. It stays through the hard days and never asks for applause. Maybe the greatest act of courage is not starting over. Maybe it's allowing yourself to believe that another good chapter is still possible. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What choice in your life led you somewhere you never expected to go? And if you enjoy stories about second chances, enduring love, resilience, and the people who find their way home when they least expect it, we hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail, and we'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep a little room in your heart for hope.